This woman managed to fool the entire U.S. legal system and got away with murdering her own 2-year-old daughter.
A murder trial opens with a series of bombshells from the defense.
This is going to be a very tough case for the prosecution.
Meet Caylee Anthony, the most hated woman in America, who should still be in prison right now, yet she's out there living her life on her own terms. She's even got a docu-series of her own and spends the night away gambling in casinos and hooking up with strangers. All of this while her daughter, Caylee, suffered a tragic and horrifying death. And thanks to the jury's decision, Caylee was declared not guilty, and she was let go after paying just a $4,000 fine. But how did Caylee die? Why did they let Caylee go? And where is she now? It all started on August 9th, 2005, right when Caylee Anthony was born. In the past, Caylee was known for having regular one-night stands and partying on a daily basis. She danced on tables, picked up occasional shifts as a shot girl at a club in Orlando, and even entered a hot body contest. But right after a 19-year-old Caylee Anthony gave birth to her little daughter, her lifestyle changed completely. She became the mother of a beautiful girl. So now she had the responsibility to take care of this innocent child. After 31 days of Caylee's disappearance, Caylee's grandmother Cindy started panicking and finally decided to call the police.
911, what's your emergency? I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally... Okay, what is here now? Okay, what is the address that you're calling from? We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl.
When the police arrived, they immediately took Caylee in for questioning. And during that time, Caylee confessed that her daughter went missing after she left her with a babysitter named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, aka Zanny, who was also nowhere to be found. The evidence that she's referring to here is when the officer searched Caylee's car, and upon further inspection, discovered an awful smell that they described as deadly. But the stench of death wasn't enough, so an air sample test was taken from her car and proved that there was indeed a body inside of the trunk. Then, while the officers continued looking for more clues, a random utility worker named Krog found pieces of human bones almost 19 feet down the road from Caylee's home. And when the police inspected the bones, they were identified as the remains of little Caylee.
Police now suspect that a utility worker's grisly discovery, a bag full of little bones, may just be the remains of 3-year-old Caylee Anthony. And now a Florida medical examiner backs them up, saying there is evidence to link those remains to the toddler's house.
Caylee was then charged with first-degree murder of her 2-year-old child, and a year later, the prosecutors announced their intention to pursue the death penalty. Meanwhile, Caylee was still behind bars waiting for a year for her trial to come. On May 24th, 2011, the whole world was watching. The prosecution claimed that Caylee was a party girl who didn't want a child, disclosing her month of shopping and drinking while Caylee was still missing. But then suddenly, Caylee's defense attorney, Jose Baez, dropped an absolute bombshell. He claimed that Caylee had drowned in the family pool, and Caylee's father, George, covered it all up, and that the utility worker, Kronk, found Caylee's body and planted it in the woods. But the defense didn't stop at just that. They also revealed that George had molested Caylee as a child.
Evidence of the psychiatric damage that sexual abuse may have done to her.
It was pretty sensational what they alleged.
Which built up her habit of lying to cover up the trauma. Taking the stand as the first witness, George denied the claim of molesting his daughter or that he knew anything about Caylee's drowning. 3 days later, the manager of the towing company that impounded Caylee's car testified that he had encountered multiple vehicles with dead bodies during his 3 decades in the business, and that the smell from Caylee's car was consistent with those past experiences. On the flip side, that same day, the fiancé of Caylee's brother also took the stand to describe the very special bond she observed between Caylee and her mother. But on the 6th of June, a forensics expert at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory explained how the shockingly high amount of chloroform found in the trunk of the car led to his conclusion that a dead body was in fact inside of it. However, the next day, his testimony was contradicted by a scientist from the FBI, who compared the chloroform level in the trunk to that found in the amount of most household cleaners.
You can find chloroform in any number of household items, correct?
It has been detected in household cleaning agents and other items, yes.
But that was not enough to halt the prosecutors. A forensics expert named John Bradley was asked by the investigators to examine the hard drive of the computer in the Anthony home for any reference to chloroform. 2 days later, he testified that someone had in fact searched for the term chloroform 84 times, and also looked up terms such as head injuries, chest trauma, and internal bleeding on the Anthony's home computer in March of 2008, roughly 3 months before Caylee went missing. But Casey's mom, Cindy, claimed that she was the one who looked it up. After almost 6 weeks of testimony and 400 pieces of evidence presented in court, the jury of 7 women and 5 men took less than 11 hours to reach a verdict of not guilty. Casey, a woman who had just lost her 2-year-old daughter, cried tears of joy, and her entire defense team wrapped their arms around each other. If she had been convicted of her daughter's death, she would have seen the rest of her life in a prison cell. Or worse, as the death penalty was still on the table. But according to one anonymous juror, the answer was simple. None of them liked Casey, but the prosecutors didn't give them enough evidence to convict. According to him, the jurors unanimously agreed to convict Casey on the charges of lying to the police, but were split when they first voted on the murder charges. He then explained that they did do a second vote, which resulted in an 11-1 vote in favor of finding Casey not guilty. Juror number 3, Jennifer Ford, explained it further in an interview. She said that the jurors didn't think that there was enough proof to find Casey guilty of the murder, which made them feel unsure about the case. She said, if you're going to charge someone with murder, don't you have to know how they killed someone or why they might have killed them? The where, when, and the how? Those are important questions, and they weren't answered. But, as a matter of fact, some of them were. 1. Caylee was missing 31 days before Casey reported it to the police. She claimed that the last time she had seen Caylee was after dropping her off with her nanny.
Is your daughter there? My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days. Why are you calling now? Why didn't you call 31 days ago?
Casey insisted that she was doing an investigation on the whereabouts of her daughter on her own, but still didn't manage to find her. This piece of evidence alone raises a huge red flag. If she really wanted to find her daughter, she would have reported her disappearance immediately. Casey was clearly keeping this a secret to cover up her own actions. If Casey's parents didn't question her about Caylee's whereabouts, nobody would have even known about her disappearance. 2. Caylee Anthony is a pathological liar. Even before the death of her daughter, Casey was known to be a liar, and there was no shortage of lies throughout the progression of her trial. Remember the nanny that she said Caylee was last seen with? She's not even real. The apartment where Casey said the babysitter lived was empty for months, and no one by the name of Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez ever lived there. But to everyone's surprise, a woman by the name of Zenaida Gonzalez actually showed up to the trial. And according to her, she's never even met Casey, Caylee, or any of the Anthonys. Casey kept up with this lie for 3 years until her lawyer announced on the opening day of trial that Casey had been lying. And according to them, her reasoning for lying was to cover up Caylee's accidental drowning in the family swimming pool.
Look what you've done! Your mother will never forgive you, and you will go to jail for child neglect for the rest of your freaking life.
But the craziest part of Casey's new alibi is that she completely threw her father under the bus. She said the reason she lied was because her father convinced her that she'd spend the rest of her life in prison if she didn't. 3. The dead smell in her car.
A scientist who studies dead bodies says the odor of decomposition coming from the carpet in the trunk of Caylee Anthony's car was overwhelming.
Casey had been driving a car in her parents' name at the time of Caylee's disappearance. So, when the car was impounded, it was up to her father to go and retrieve it. When retrieving the car, both the impound worker and Casey's father found a horrific smell. But when they opened up the trunk, there was no dead body, only a bag of trash. However, there were traces of chloroform in the car, as well as evidence that a decomposing body was inside the car. It's very clear that this bag of trash was placed in the trunk by none other than Casey. And it's very possible that she did this in order to cover up that the true cause of the smell was her daughter's dead body. 4. Caylee's remains were found near her home. Little Caylee's remains were inside of a trash bag, with her skull duct taped near her mouth. There were also traces of chloroform found in her hair. But most importantly, the state in which Caylee's remains were found doesn't match the way Casey described her death. Most obviously, why is there duct tape on the mouth of a girl who apparently accidentally drowned in a pool? 5. The searches on Casey's computer. During questioning, Casey's mother tried to defend her daughter by taking the blame for searching for chloroform on the computer. But her work records show that she was at work when the searches were made. Casey's mother trying to cover for her daughter clearly means that she knew Casey was guilty. Casey dug herself deeper and deeper into her own lies as the trial went on. And to the disbelief of many, she actually got away with it.
Exactly 12:14 a.m. after 1,054 days in jail, Caylee Anthony, who has been called the most hated woman in America, walked free.
She received just a 4-year sentence and only a $4,000 fine for the 4 counts of lying to the police. But the prison time was then canceled out thanks to 3 years she'd already spent behind bars and credit for good behavior. So on July 17th, she was released from prison. The entire nation was outraged. They were comparing it to the trial of O.J. Simpson in 1995. And thanks to this case, there were a slew of bills in several states for Caylee's Law, which would make it a felony for a parent or a legal guardian not to report a missing child. In 2012, Florida Governor Rick Scott signed the bill, putting it into action immediately. Meanwhile, the case of Caylee Anthony would not leave the headlines. People were fuming and trying to figure out a way to put her back into prison. But where was Casey now?
Some semblance of freedom. She's never left alone. If she goes out anywhere at all, people will bother her just like frequently they do me.
She started to live a life of isolation inside of her Florida home, afraid of going out into the public due to the reactions to the case. But she still had to go to work, right? Well, nobody was willing to hire a killer. So eventually, she had to file for bankruptcy because she couldn't afford to pay her bills. She has since stopped speaking to her parents and only communicates with the lawyers who helped her through it all. In 2015, she did try starting her own photography business. She even created a Twitter account for her company, Case Photography. But it was soon deleted when she received fewer photo inquiries and more questions about the trial. In the spring of 2017, Casey gave a series of interviews to the Associated Press, claiming to this day she never killed her daughter, saying she doesn't give a shit about what anyone thinks of her. She sleeps pretty well at night.
To your understanding, how did she die?
I don't know.
You don't know? Something about drowning, possibly.
Everyone else has their theories. I don't know.
The Associated Press described the interview with Anthony as bizarre and often contradictory, and ultimately raising more questions than answers about the case. In June 2019, Casey announced she was working on a film about her life. But in September 2020, there were rumors that the movie just hadn't really gotten off the ground. And then, of course, COVID became a thing, and it stopped any momentum that the film had. After the project fell through, Casey set her sights on yet another way to share her story. She was getting ready to tell her truth by participating in a TV documentary about her life. But she would only go through with the documentary if it was to be on her terms. And if things aren't going the way she wants, she wouldn't hesitate to pull out. A few months later, Casey launched a private investigation firm in Florida. And a lot of people wondered if Casey wanted to investigate the death of her own daughter. However, that was not the case. Instead, she claimed that she wanted to help others who are facing serious legal charges, as according to her, she knows what it's like to be accused of something that she didn't do. Now she wants to help other wrongfully accused people, especially women, and help them get justice. In November 2022, Peacock announced the premiere of its series, Caylee Anthony, Where the Truth Lies. The series had her personal archives, behind-the-scenes footage, and the defense's evidence to give viewers a never-before-seen look into both sides of the trial. And in episode 1 of the Peacock documentary, Caylee spoke out on several topics regarding the disappearance and death of her daughter. She also opened up on how Caylee was conceived. According to her, when she was 18, she was at a house party, had a couple of beers, and completely lost her memory because she was drugged. She was extremely disoriented, and it's at that moment she felt she had forcible sex. She felt guilty for originally telling her then-boyfriend, Jesse Grunt, that he was Caylee's father. She thought there was a possibility he could be the dad, but then realized quickly that that was not the case. She said that she made a selfish decision to not tell Jesse, and that she lied to everyone about Caylee's paternity. But she didn't stop at just that. She also made some claims that shocked the world, saying that she was sexually abused by her father and her brother, allegations that both George Anthony and Lee Anthony have denied. She claimed her father allegedly started abusing her when she was 8 years old and stopped when she was 12. She then went on to say her brother abused her when she was between the ages of 12 and 15. She said her brother never raped her, but it was close enough to a point where there was a pattern. The showrunner, Alexandra Dean, told BuzzFeed that Caylee had a small life, with a close friend and a small circle of trusted loved ones. Now, at the age of 37, she leads a life that's very lonely. According to one of her friends, people hate her, and she knows it. But it looks like Caylee is not as lonely as it seems. In 2021, Anthony called the cops to report a fight with Thelma Moya, a girl who had been dating the same guy at the same time as her.
So I'm still wet. I got a drink thrown at me. This girl has been harassing me for a while. I have her cell phone number.
After the trial, Caylee was living in fear of the public eye. But now, after more than 12 years since then, she's no longer afraid. In April 2023, Caylee was spotted back in Orlando, Florida, and she was seen checking in at a hotel at Walt Disney World. Until last year, she was living with Patrick McKenna, a 69-year-old private investigator who worked on her case. McKenna is also known for his work on the O.J. Simpson case. She also now works for McKenna, but lives alone. For those who knew Anthony during her party days in Orlando, her quiet life today is now completely unrecognizable. She has main character syndrome, and now she's alone, said Shore, her former co-worker. But being alone, it's not something that Caylee desires anymore. According to her friends, Caylee now wants to have kids again, claiming she's looking for stability, and that if she wants to have another kid, she'll have another kid.
If she is granted a chance again to have another child, I hope the child is strong, grows up to be a worthwhile part of society. And the person that she has the child with, I hope they are going to love her and that child immensely.
But by the looks of it, sadly, things are about to get far worse for her once again. By the time of this video, Caylee's parents will be going through polygraph tests on camera to answer lingering questions about George's involvement in Caylee's death. And soon, there'll be more details as to what happened that night.